Welcome to another episode of Zormaus Airsoft Corner. Today we have a 100 subscriber special, basically, in which I would like to talk about my Vipertech M4 GBBR that I've had for a while and that doesn't really look like an M4 anymore. It is a rather old model. It is the oldest airsoft gun I've ever owned, and it probably will remain the oldest airsoft gun I've ever owned because this beauty, going by the feature set inside when I got it, was made in around 2012, 2011, so it's probably about 15 years old by now. It probably came into Germany in the mid-2010s, like 2014, 2016. And I suspect it was either old stock from a shop that sold them to German retailers, or Vipertech had old parts lying around and they made the best of what they had. Either way, this was outdated when it came into Germany, and it is less outdated now, but I didn't update everything about it. And what I have done to it, I'm gonna show you and go into more detail about now. So let's start with externals. I have a 10.3 inch barrel on this. It has a Angry Gun Surefire muzzle device and sometimes suppressor, because I think it looks really neat with it, and it also feels really nice with this can, also without the can. I have a pair of FAV flip-up sights. I've never used them and never had to use them, probably never will, but I want them on there because I like having flip-ups. This is a Spec Precision clone of a BCM mount. I may eventually get a real one because the Spec Precision one had one fatal flaw in that the the bolt that is used to affix the claw that holds it onto the Picatinny rail goes from a 6mm thick steel rod into a M3 screw, which I didn't know at the time, so I over tightened it and broke the screw off. I can still use the mount with an ersatz screw, but it's not as good as it should be. It doesn't look as good as it should, and it's not real, and all the other BCM furniture on this rifle is real, so I would kind of like to replace that down the line. Real BCM charging handle, real steel BCM handguard, foregrip, rail covers, sling mount, grip, trigger guard, and stock. I really like it may be key mod. Yeah, key mod is a bit cringe these days, but it was available and relatively cheap at the time. So I got a KMR9 instead of an M-Lock rail, and it works perfectly fine. I can't use lights or lasers anyway, so I don't need to worry about zeroing, and this grip has not come off at any time, so I'm not worried about key mod's weaknesses, especially since BCM design there's pretty well. I recently got this HRF clone magwell. It's probably a BBT or BJ Tactical from, well, back when they made them. It's a decent fit on the Vipertech, didn't need any modification to fit on the gun, but to use it with the GHK PMAX that I use, I had to Dremel out a bit of this rear end here so that the shelf on the magazine, the over insertion shelf, wouldn't get in the way. One thing these early Vipertechs from 15 years ago had is very faint markings. I hope you can see those. Very faint markings. But I may do a bit of close-up for that later. But they are there. They are engraved, not rolled, I think. Nowadays they're, I think, rolled and much clearer and deeper. So modern Vipertechs are better than old ones, but this one is still 6061 forged aluminum and hard-code anodized, which is the important things about a Vipertech. This thing is my go-to gun when I see someone that needs a gun at the field because theirs broke down or they didn't have one, and I would like them to play with something nicer for a change. So this is a gun that I can just lend out to people because I know it's not going to break in a catastrophic way, and if something minor breaks on it, I can just fix it. Other than that, I also have a Magpul bad lever on it and GNP anti-rotation or anti-walk pins. They're not that great, but yeah. And the bad lever I really like because not only can I drop the bolt, but but I can also lock the bolt with it, and that's really neat. All right, let's move on to some internals. Pin comes out easily. Oh yeah, before I get to internals, receiver wobble is minimal, partly because of what I did to it. It has a bit of side-to-side play, but it doesn't rock that much. Selectors default. Now, internally, let's break it down completely. In the lower well, let's start with the upper receiver. In the upper, I have a old ViperTech bolt carrier group. This is from before they had variable stroke, and this doesn't allow for a weight insert in the back because they didn't do that back then. This is still a chunk of CNC'd steel, and it is heat treated. So it has only very, very slightly deformed on the bolt catch surface, which is here. And otherwise stood up really, really well through tens of thousands, if not 100,000 shots through the previous owner and me combined. It has a 16mm nozzle. Yeah, and the nozzle stop likes coming out, if not in the gun. Doesn't really matter. It has a 16mm nozzle with dual O-rings, and I have replaced the front of those O-rings with an X-ring. I will put the measurements for that in the description, I think. I don't know them off the top of my head. And that seems to slightly improve efficiency and cold weather performance with this bolt carrier, but to improve that, I have used a Z-Parts carrier in the past. That has been a bit finicky in terms of, one, staying in one piece. It likes to break nozzle stops, and also parts on the nozzle. And the other thing is that it has not the best of, it doesn't play really nice with the G-Mags in terms of feeding, which is a bit of a shame. I'm looking to put an MCX nozzle in it, and I think that should work, which would be really cool if it worked out, because those things have a more reliable reputation and they're cheaper. And a Z-Parts nozzle is like 150 euros, and the MCX nozzle is like 30. Right. Bolt carrier is, as I said, steel, short-stroked, relatively heavy. Let me get my scale. The scales of justice say it is, with the nozzle, 291 grams. So 290 grams in the bolt carrier. And just to add more context, this is also moving mass. This is a real steel carbine buffer, 85 grams, so 3 ounces for this buffer, and the bolt carrier adds another 290 grams of moving mass, or 270 grams of moving mass, because the nozzle weighs something and doesn't really move. So we have a moving mass of around more than 350 grams. That's more than the VFC FAL and almost as much as the VFC AK. That's about 390, I think. Furthermore, in the upper, BCM charging handle, as I said, real steel compatible. Works perfectly fine with the standard one, but I wanted to more BCM on my gun. Forward assist doesn't really work on this one. Modern VTs do work in terms of forward assist. This one just, either it is something about the bolt carrier not being cut deeply enough on this side. I think the Z-Parts carrier also does work with the forward assist, so I think it's the bolt carrier that's actually the issue. But you don't really need a forward assist anyway. Now, on to more about the bolt carrier. Real steel barrel nut threading, so I obviously put on a real steel barrel nut for the BCM handguard. But it came with a bronze hopped chamber base and feed ramp in the inside. That was the old standard back in the day, and those had a mixed reputation when it came to feeding and reliability. So I opted to replace that with a modern silvery one that has a bit of different geometry, and it was already a different improvement in terms of feeding reliability. So I'm happy I did that. The hop unit is also up, the recent model with the not AEG style bucking, but the proprietary bucking. It gets really good results. So accuracy is not something that you really should worry about with a ViperTech, because they are really good out of the box in terms of accuracy once they are bedded in and properly installed. They are sensitive to installation issues. For the barrel nut, staying on that topic, you really need to put it on nice and tight. You do want to apply 35 to 50 Newton meters of torque to them when you torque them down. So A, they don't go anywhere. B, they fit everything properly, tightly together into the upper, because if they don't, you may have feeding issues. And feeding issues means BB gets crunched by the bolt carrier or nozzle slamming into the chamber base. And yeah, next thing you know, your magazine suddenly has no gas in it because it all blew out. Cue video. Right. The final thing I did with the upper is I JB welded in this aluminum piece here that extends slightly down from the upper and impinges on, moving on to the lower receiver, the gas firing pin assembly. Because the lower is something that you also may want to do some work on, or may have to do some work on, with older Vipertechs. The buffer assembly is mostly fine. I have a Western Arms standard spring, like 22 newtons in there for all-weather use. Basically, it works down to low single digits in Celsius, so between 3 and 10 Celsius is fine. Below that, I would probably need to use my very light spring, especially with a stock bolt carrier. Now, things I've done to the lower are I've added a bit of tape down here and to the sides so that there's the receiver wobble is reduced. Otherwise, there's some, and an AccuWedge doesn't fit this old generation. They do fit modern VTs as far as I know, but not these old ones. I've had to do some work on the trigger as well, because as it aged, it started doubling on me. So when you would fire and you would try to rapid fire, instead of the trigger properly resetting, it would slip off the hammer would slip off the trigger and immediately fire a second shot as soon as the bolt came forward, meaning that you would essentially fire a short burst of 2 to 3 shots instead of just 1 or 2 shots that you had meant to do. It's not really a problem when it happens. Energy is stable in these short bursts with this bolt carrier. Like this has a Explosive Enterprises NPAS in it, so it's very well adjustable and stable at around 1.1 joules right now. I could go obviously higher, could go to just over 2 joules with it, but why would I? 1.2 is perfectly fine for what I do. Most of the engagements at the field I play are within 50 meters, and for that 1.2 is perfectly adequate. Most engagements are within 25. Right. The bad lever is a drop-in, so no worries about that. It does, however, require stiffer feed springs in your magazines because there is extra mass in the bolt catch now that needs to be moved when the bolt lock is engaged, and the standard GHK feed springs are a bit too weak to do that. So I have opted for PTW springs. You can use them in full length, but you can also just shorten them to make them a bit weaker and easier to load. The difference is actually pretty minor between those two variants, I think. What else have I done? Obviously added those GNP pins. Those are on the one hand a bit neat because, or on the one hand a recommendable option, because especially during the COVID years, the fire control group pins from Vipertech tended to break occasionally. They have very strong hammer springs out of the box, and the pins had some flaws in their heat treatment and materials so that they would break after a couple thousand shots, which is not good. The GMP one here has about, I have had that in my Inokatsu before that, so it probably has 20,000 shots through it, and it doesn't really have any signs of wear on it when I remove them. What I have changed, however, is I had to drill this one screw out and put in a bigger screw with a bigger hole, with a bigger head, so that You can on the side see the original one. This is an M1.5 Allen key, and this is a 2mm Allen key, so this is a lot better to put in and take out. A lot more solid. And once they are Loctite, they don't go anywhere. The hammer spring I'm running is right now, there's a super weak, self-made, modified GHK, Vipertech hammer spring in there. So since I like playing at colder temperatures and don't really play above 30 degrees at all, Celsius that is, I don't need a strong hammer spring. So I have a very weak hammer spring in here, which, especially paired with the GHK mags, doesn't matter at all in my experience. And this still results in a very snappy cycle. It is more conducive to efficiency and cold weather function, but still, it's not the best gun in the cold. And I don't think this old one, will ever be. Maybe the MCX nozzle will change that, but for now, it's not. Before I talk about the last thing I did to the lower, just to demonstrate, there are no BBs in this. I did check that, yeah. Just some dry fire. There is no issue with this hammer. And this magazine was at about 25 degrees or 26 degrees when we started. So it's warm and has ASG brown in there. To anyone using an AR platform by VFC, GHK, or Vipertech, get a real steel buffer. It makes a hell of a difference in terms of how the gun feels to shoot. It's much better. And no, even without the buffer booster spring in there, you don't lose that much in terms of cyclic rate or speed. Now, the one final thing that must be addressed on all Vipertechs of this generation and older with the silver gas firing pin assembly here, GFPA, these break. They have an ear on the bottom that is a semicircle, that is basically a peninsula with a hole in it, and the magazine catch goes through that hole and is part of the retention system that keeps this assembly in the gun. And this ear on the bottom, this peninsula, likes to just break off. And when it's broken, the gas firing pin assembly is free to float up and down inside the receiver, which works, but it rides up. And the ledge of the steel ledge of this bolt catch piece starts grinding down the nozzle's underside, which obviously isn't good for your gas routers, isn't good for your seal, and will eventually break things in your magazine, which you don't want. So what I've done is I could have left the original broken ear down there. In the retrospect, I didn't know that at the time, so I first removed that and replaced it with a cut piece of metal that I made to retain the spring for the mag catch. Let me see if I can just, I don't know, I can't show that with the bad leather in place. But that was pretty easy, but it's fine if you leave that alone. What you really need to do, though, let me get my pin punch, is drive out the bolt lock pin with a roll pin punch, bolt lock spring, bolt lock with bad lever, and then also let's take out this reinforcing pin, and there's a second spring in there. I had forgotten about that. Let's use something to extract that. I somehow forgot about this piece. Oh well. Anyway, what I was gonna say is this is a bit finicky. I hope it shows up on camera, but this is the hole for the bolt catch spring, and above it is another hole. That's not there by default. I drilled that hole, and with the gas firing pin removed, that hole goes through the entirety of the gas firing pin assembly. It is an M2.5 hole that I have tapped to M3, and I have put an M3 grub screw in there that then wedges against the receiver on the right side and keeps it in place. I've also peened the gas firing pin assembly against the receiver in several places to reinforce the retention there, and added that piece in the upper receiver that I talked about earlier. And that has held up for several thousand shots without any issues at all. I still can remove the assembly if I ever need to swap the spring on the firing pin, for example, which is also something that may break, especially if you use the stiff stock hammer spring. But I've taken great measures to prevent that from happening by using a weaker hammer spring. Let me just reassemble this while I keep talking, hopefully. This gun is a bit like my baby. I have had it for a couple years. I'm not the first owner, but maybe I will be the last, because I really like it. I've tried selling it, or I've thought about selling it and put up an offer for it, but it was not to people's liking because I want a pretty penny for it, because there's so much work that's gone into it and I know how good it is. I was hoping to replace it with a Guns Modify Scar, but I have that Scar now, but it's not really a good replacement for the ViperTech. The ViperTech's just irreplaceable. There's nothing that is as robust as a ViperTech, even though the Guns Modify is close with a steel fire control group parts, an extruded 6061 aluminum upper, really nice polymer on the lower, a good barrel attachment system, which is something that I greatly value as well. That's already correct, but still tight. Let's get that pin through. Good. Let's see. Yep, moving freely, as it should. Yeah, I don't see this gun going anywhere anytime soon. I've put so much work into it, and I'm the one person in the world that knows everything about this gun, basically. That I really don't see myself ever giving it up. I see myself keeping to modify it, so this is maybe a ship of Theseus at the end, beyond the receiver and barrel. But I intend to keep it working and keep improving it for a long, long time to come. And she has great potential. I was going to get version 3 G-Mags, but considering the feed springs in those and the followers that have been modified by me to prevent issues from the bolt catch failing, as you may see, I have chamfered the rear edge of the of the follower, so that when the bolt rides forward and the nozzle would normally slam into the rear of the follower, it doesn't. It pushes it down. But yeah, that makes it kind of hard to sell them, because they are not exactly new. Even though they work like new, they work just fine. There was one of those bursts in there. There was one of those bursts. I've also got some footage of the Z-Parts bolt carrier that I interchangeably use in this gun, that I'll probably splice in at some point. Right, so let's check that 16mm ViperTech recoil. These mags are slightly chilly GHK V2s, filled with ASG Brown and some .2 BBs. They are not full, but it'll suffice to give you an idea. Semi-auto only, Germany. This magazine is a bit colder. I find this satisfying. For comparison, Z-Parts carrier, same gun, different magazines, but same load. A few more BBs in there, I think. Also satisfying, a bit more punchy than the other. This one is still slightly short-stroked, but less than the ViperTech setup. is a bit more punchy than the 16mm carrier I have, but like I said, it has issues in terms of durability and function that I hope to resolve in the future with the VFC or APFG MCX nozzle, which should be a definite improvement over the stock Z-Parts one, even though the Z-Parts one is nice and aluminum and fancy and 70-75 and well, not as indestructible as they should be. And like I said, they break nozzle stops here left and right on mine, at least, because I think the batch that Empyrean Store got just has poor materials. The bolt carrier also developed a lot of peening compared to the Vipertech one, so I think they got a bit of a lemon there. Oh well, live and learn. Right, is there anything else I want to say about this? Not really. Vipertechs are basically irreplaceable. You can get a very nice forged VFC V2 from 7 years ago if you can find one. Those won't be quite as nice as a Vipertech. You can get a forged GHK. That will not be quite as nice as a Vipertech, even though it may work better in the cold, depending on your sample. GHKs are like that. You can make a Turkey Marui MWS based 70-75 forged gun these days because the parts are available. But then you are going to have to deal with a lot of tolerancing issues. You may not get the efficiency or cold weather resistance, cold weather resistance that you're used to from your MWS out of it. The Vipertech just does it all for me. It is nigh indestructible. I am more worried about anything I throw this gun onto than the gun I throw onto it. It is a really reliable piece for me once I had the feeding issues sorted out. But G-mags with slightly modified feed lips work perfectly fine, and the version 3 G-mags apparently work without modification. I would like to get some, but that would be a huge investment, and I'm currently not looking to do that. A good sight would also be nice, because the vector optics, while they are fine, and this Rapper 1x25 has a good, clean, small reticle that gets daylight bright, but it is not really appropriate to have a Vipertech with a budget real steel red dot on it, I feel, so I may invest in a nice mount and optic at some point. But that's pretty much it. Ergonomically, this is my favorite gun. It feels super natural to point. It feels super natural to C-clamp. I like the beefy BCM grip. The safety is just an AR safety. The trigger is just a light AR single stage trigger. A bit stagey, but smooth enough, not gritty, and overall pretty light with the spring I have in there, which is slightly weaker than a Vipertech Winter Hammer spring. And I would recommend at least getting that one unless you're only playing at 25 degrees and above. Right, I think that covers all that there is to this Vipertech. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want, I can go into more detail on other guns in the future that I have, like FAL, VFC FAL, obviously the APC9. The Guns Modify Scar L will also get a few videos, I think. The VFC AK has been covered very well by Explosive Enterprises, as incidentally has the Vipertech platform. I'll link those videos in the description. But yeah, this is one for my collection that is going to stay, I think. I don't see a chance that I'll be able to sell it for a price that would be appropriate in my eyes. So yeah, I want too much for it, and I'd rather keep it than sell it cheap. All right, see you in the next one. Cheers!